everything is based on data and computer systems, basically. In that sense, we are vulnerable as a society, we are vulnerable as a people, we are vulnerable as individuals and as an economy. And we have to take action, every one of us, to make sure we know the risks and we manage those risks as good as we can.
In this episode, I'm talking with ETH Zurich alumna and cybersecurity expert Maya Bundt, who was an executive at the reinsurance group Swiss Re for 20 years and is now a member of the board of several organizations, including CyberPeace. This is the We Are ETH podcast, and I'm Susan Kish, your host. So Maya, help me connect the dots here. You got a diploma in geoecology in Beirut at the University of Beirut in Germany. Then you did postgrad in applied statistics at the ETH Zurich. And then you did a doctorate in environmental science. But now you're a cybersecurity expert, having worked in reinsurance for a long time. So talk us through how this path worked and how did you actually start off in geoecology?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Susan. And I think the word you are looking for is life. Life happens. And then you set out to be a environmental scientist, and then you end up being a cyber expert. So it's been a journey, colorful journey. There is no step that I, would do otherwise. So it was a good journey for me. Yeah, I started studying geoecology in Bayreuth. That's a small town in northeastern Bavaria. They have a small but very good university there. And the program that I was studying was quite exclusive at that time. There were only, I think, 3 universities in Germany overall where you could study geoecology. It's quite similar, actually, but a little bit different from environmental science at the ETH.
What is the difference?
I think they just have different courses in the beginning, and you can then major in slightly different areas. So what I did after, the first 2 years of general studies, where you do all the math and physics and chemistry and all the practicals in Bayreuth, at that time, I have no idea whether that changed by now. You could specialize in different areas, and I specialized in soil science.
How did you get interested in soils? What was it about soils?
I always wanted to study biology. And that was because I had an awesome teacher in my gymnasium in school.
That makes a huge difference, doesn't it?
It's incredible. I think that is actually one of the biggest things that a teacher can do is kind of inspire this passion of their pupils. And I had this wonderful teacher. His name, we called him Lurchi, which is as a nice name for a little lizard.
How affectionate.
No, it's true. And he, brought back stories from his travels in Madagascar at that time, where nobody ever traveled to Madagascar. And he was really an inspiring teacher. So I set out. I wanted to study biology, and then did a little university tour in Germany to see which university had the programs that were fitting to me. And while I did that, while visiting Bayreuth, I stumbled across geoecology, so geoecology. And I thought, wow, that's it.
Is that where geography intersects with ecology, or what is geoecology?
It's all the life and sciences together. So in the pre-diploma at that time, we still had the diploma studies. So the first 2 years, as I said, you do math and statistics, and I did a little bit of programming as well. Also, chemistry we had with the chemists, and math and physics and everything. So you go through all of that, and then you also have, the interesting stuff then that, kind of into the thick of things, like soil science or hydrology.
What's hydrology?
Hydrology is a science of the water. And, the university at that time was, doing a lot of experiments of small streams and how they've flowed, and what kind of lives in their water quality, etc. Geology, we did a lot of really cool excursions, going out even by bike, driving around Bayreuth and looking at geological formations, or in the soil science part, then digging holes in the ground and looking at the soil profiles, and lots of practicals. And I have memories of summers sitting in a field and looking and counting basically plants and seeing what's there.
So how did you go from Bayreuth, which is in Germany, to the ETH Zurich? And why did you pick statistics? Because I got to tell you, that is not usually in the fun category.
So yeah,
anyway.
I think I have to put something right. So I did that statistics course, but I did it while doing my PhD in environmental science and soil science at the ETH.
So you did your PhD at the ETH.
Exactly. And I knew I had to employ statistics in my field work. So I thought, this one or two courses that I took, that was a long time ago. And I thought I'd better, brush up my statistics knowledge. And that was a good idea, because at that time I had my own, field experiments. And all of a sudden statistics made sense. Before that, it was kind of a concept. That
abstract
really
concept.
Didn't stick with me so much. I could learn it and I could write, I could pass the tests, but it didn't talk to me. But when you are designing your own field experiments and then you are looking at, the concepts and you think this through in that context, it's a completely different story. So that would be my shout out to every student who is despairing on statistics. Wait until you have, a practical work in front of you and employ it. And then it's a completely different thing.
So this was in the 90s?
That was in 1996, I think it was. It's a long time ago.
It's not that long, but I understand.
And then I found a project which was just starting at that point in time at the WSL, the Eidgenössische Forschungsanstalt für Wald, Schnee und Landschaft. That's the Swiss Federal Institute for Forest, Snow and Landscape Research. And it belongs to the ETH, but it's not the kind of the university itself, but it's a separate institute. So they don't do any courses or anything, but as a PhD student, you can be there, but you have to find a professor at the ETH to take you on. So that was my big thing. And I remember that was quite funny. So I found a space there, somebody who would take me on with my, grand research ideas, which I thought were perfectly suited for this, for this new large project that was starting then. And I found somebody who would, give me a contract. So that was all set. But then I still had to convince a professor at the ETH to kind of take me on as a PhD student.
And how did you do that?
Yeah, I took my research proposal and I had it was like an interview, and he sat there in front of me, and I think he brought a couple of his students as well, so they could, challenge me from all sides. It was interesting. I think, I came with all these ideas. And the good thing was the research that I proposed was a continuation and further a deep dive of some research that I had done in my diploma thesis. So I had done already some work and I was already into the thick of things, and I was, quite solid in terms of, what I knew already. So, and how I wanted to apply that to this new field, right? Oh my goodness. It was at that time, this institute was in an industrial complex in Schlieren, which is kind of on the outskirts of Zurich. Yeah. Nobody wanted to go there. So I went there, and he was sitting there in front of me. And then he just looked at me and said, okay, well, it's all good, but please now, here is a piece of paper. Write down the two most important graphs, basically the results of your research, write them down right now. And I went,
holy cow.
Okay.
So it sounds like he was forcing you to sort of step back from the details and really tell you what your goal was.
He wanted to see if I had a hypothesis, a scientific hypothesis. And
Got it.
I think I did, but not so clearly, right? So he really kind
Right.
of pushed me to view that in a different way, and that stayed with me. Honestly, it stayed with me.
Very, very cool. So you did this work. That research typically takes several years. Did you move to Schlieren or you stayed in Zurich?
Well, I moved to Zurich for that then,
Hmm.
and I stayed in Zurich. And yes, it took me, I think I did 1 year or 1 year and a half of very intensive field experiments. And that was fun
Hmm.
too, because I had this huge idea and everybody was laughing at me. And obviously, I couldn't do it on my own. So I bribed everybody and their grandmother to come with me to the forest and help out. And what I did is every field day, I baked, a huge cake and brought cans of coffee and tea and whatnot. And I think, yeah, people were quite happy to, come out once in a while for a day in the forest with me and take soil samples and, be part of this quite amazing, I must say, sorry, it's not very Swiss here, but quite amazing experiment that we did then.
How do you actually take a soil sample? What does that mean? You just sort of take a trowel and dig in the ground, or what does that mean?
Since I wanted to show how kind of solutes in water, how they flow through the soil, whether they flow through the forest soil everywhere the same, or whether they are, some preferential flow path where more of the solutes go through, etc., and what kind of impact
Hmm.
that has on the chemical environment then. So what we did is to be able to visualize that, right? We had a sprinkler and we colored water with some food color, blue food color, and then we sprinkled it onto a square meter basically of the forest soil, and then we dug a really really big hole. So you had a nice profile, like a wall, and then you could actually see where the blue color had flowed through, and so that was obviously stained blue, and the rest, which was still all brown, didn't get any of the rain, so to speak. In the different layers, you could take samples from the blue part of the soil and from the
Hmm.
brown part of the soil. And then you would take samples into, little plastic bags, which obviously you had
Right.
to label very, very carefully because that was, super important. Which experiment, which day, and which depths, and so on. So we all did that. And then you would take the soil samples back to the laboratory. I have, pictures with hundreds and hundreds of bottles. And the nice thing was, since this experiment was quite special and the samples itself were kind of unique, a lot of people wanted to work with me. So it was great. I could work with, other people who were interested in not the chemical analysis I did myself, but then there were people who would do biological analysis on microorganisms on those samples. And I had a colleague who would do radio measurements.
Oh, for radioactivity?
Yeah, and that was so cool
Oh,
because I
wow.
had these samples, and then we just wrote papers together, and that was cool. That was really good.
So you finished your PhD, and then what? BCG said, "Here's a smart young lady. I'm going to hire her." Or how did you start off? How did you switch into management consulting?
I finished my PhD. I, did everything. And then I did go into management consulting. And the reason for that was I thought I had spent now basically all my life in school and at university, and I loved it. It was great. But I thought if I want to continue, then it's very confined to, first of all, that path. The other thought that I had is if I continue with this, I'm very confined in my life choices.
You didn't have many options, right?
Yeah, there's only very few universities and very few open positions in my field. It's a very, very specialized field, right? And I thought,
Right.
okay, do I want to kind of live my life in a way that I absolutely have to go no matter what? If there's an open position and I can have it, I have to move there. And I thought maybe there are other things out there and I would like to explore a little bit more, right? And this is why I then looked around, and management consulting seemed like a good opportunity at that time to get into different industries, learn.
Learn about business, learn about other parts of the world.
Exactly. So that was my thinking at that point in time. It worked out pretty well, I would say.
And then talk us through, how did you go from management consulting did you go after that directly to Swiss Re?
Yeah, that was an kind of an easy transition, because at some point, and I knew that when I was starting, that I, probably wouldn't, grow old and gray hairs in management consulting. It was a great time, wouldn't miss it. But I knew that was probably only an interim step for me. And I started looking to what would be my next step. And then Swiss Re actually came with an offer. I had, done some work for Swiss Re while at BCG, so they knew me. That was, for me, was an easy move, because I just loved working at Swiss Re and with the Swiss Re people. So that was I felt at home there. They had a very nice corporate culture that kind of I responded to. And they had an interesting offer for me, so I jumped.
And at Swiss Re, what did you do, and how did the interest in cybersecurity arise?
That took a little bit, right? So I started off I always say, and I hope nobody ever listens to this podcast, because I probably will be crucified for that. But I started off in technical accounting and claims, and that is in reinsurance at that point in time, I must say, right? It's now I hope it's different. I think it's different. But at that time, it was like, you always have this view of the dish cleaner in a restaurant, right? And then make their way up, right? I started at the end of the reinsurance chain, which is where then all the accounts are being managed and the claims are settled. That sounds weird, but it was an interesting time, because what you do is you understand the business
at a very fundamental level. Yeah.
And that helped me a lot later on,
I'm sure.
So it was really cool. And I also, were able to have my first team, my first line management experiences, had a great great bosses, I must say. So I learned a lot, and it was a good time.
And it sounds like during the 20 years, you just kept on getting interesting jobs every 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, not every 2 or 3 years, but I moved quite a lot. And I think what is maybe a bit unusual is I kind of jumped across lines. So from technical accounting and claims, I went into basically operations, and then into IT, completely different area. From there, I went into group strategy, again, completely different area, and then into reinsurance. And here now you hear a little bit also how I ended up as a cyber expert. And that, I would say, probably started when I was working in IT, where for a very short time, I also had in my area of responsibility the cybersecurity team. But even after that was gone, that was always a big topic in IT. And I kind of took that and, whatever I had learned and started to love in terms of technology and understanding also the risks of that. When I then went and worked in group strategy, that topic just, was sitting there and was basically shouting at me, here I am, I need somebody to, help me develop. And, I just said, okay, well, maybe that's me.
But this was cybersecurity from the perspective of underwriting the risk of others, or cybersecurity in terms of protecting Swiss Re?
No, that was cybersecurity in terms of cyber insurance. And that was, at a time where there wasn't a lot there.
This is what years? 2000s?
Well, no, that was 2014, maybe. So there was a cyber insurance market, but it was really, really small. Really, really small.
Right.
And
the demand was probably huge.
No, there was no demand.
Really?
Yeah.
People weren't interested in being insured against it?
Nope. Mm-mm. Most people didn't know.
So they effectively self-insured?
Yes, absolutely.
Wow.
Probably thought they were already insured, but they weren't. No, that was at a time where actually the insurance industry's biggest growth inhibitor was that people didn't take cyber risks very seriously. You cannot imagine it today because it's everywhere, and
It's
and it's a
right.
but it's honestly that was the biggest thing was, how do we get awareness into the market? And yes, there were a few companies that were insured, mainly the big large corporates. That was where the market started. The market was tiny. And also, very few insurers were actually offering cyber insurance at that time. So it was really, at the start, and nobody understood it. I mean, honestly, we didn't understand it. We didn't have processes. We didn't, that was, we developed that over time. Also, all the models to model the risk, etc. So that all came then, during that time, and that was what was so fascinating to me.
To make sure we're on the same wavelength, how would you define cybersecurity? Right now, in the days of internets of things and a gazillion devices, what is it exactly?
So cybersecurity, you have this triumvirate of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Whatever you do, and you make sure you safeguard your confidentiality, your integrity, and your availability of data and systems. So you can, you can work, you can do your normal operations, etc. You safeguard the people behind those data, if this is, for example, personally identifiable information. Then that is cybersecurity. In terms of insurance, as I said, that started early. The first cyber insurance products probably came in 2000 with the year 2K, a bug and scare.
Oh, right.
So that is when, first products came on the market. That was, as I said, very small market. Then that developed towards different areas. One big booster was then the kind of data privacy infringement covers in the US, when all of a sudden
Those big hacks.
and then there was a lot of risk of, obviously, of legal risks, etc., in connection with that. That was a big driver. So the US market largely developed based on these data privacy infringement covers, whereas in the rest of the world, mainly Europe, first, there was probably a little bit more focus on business interruption covers. Now that has all come together, and it's basically same demands and needs everywhere, except obviously in jurisdictions where you don't have very strong data privacy laws. There, the need for strong data privacy covers is not as big as in other markets.
How big is the cybersecurity insurance and reinsurance market today then? If you describe it as very small, as recent as 2014.
I'm out of the market now, for a year or almost a year. So I probably don't have the latest numbers, but I guess it's around 14, 15 billion US dollars globally.
So what today, especially after ChatGPT exploded and the increased interest in areas around artificial intelligence, and seeing all the military applications of this in the war in Ukraine, what do you see as the biggest threats that we should be cyber aware of in 23?
Yeah, so I think you kind of came out with two good ones, right? So I think if we're talking about how our lives and our thinking is driven and supported by media, by search engines, by artificial intelligence, whatever, I think that is one really big area of risk. And there are several risks associated to it, right? You can have the wrong training sets, you can have not the right governance around it, you can have all kinds of things. But I think that is something that has a really broad societal impact. And we see that everywhere, right? Is the kind of ability to influence large groups of people. I think that is a huge risk associated with that. So I think we absolutely need to kind of find the right way to govern these models, but also to make sure the education on how to use digital means, use support functions, that is super important for everybody, for just everybody. It should not be kind of only taught in university, not only at the ETH level, right? But that is something that, you should start, having kids in kindergarten already, understand and critically think about what it is. And obviously you can't go too far there, but you can, start with the basics, right? So I think that is a big story. In terms of state or state-sponsored aggression in cyberspace, there has been a problem for years now. It's only gotten, I think, bigger over the years. Having said that, the biggest surprise, I think, of the Ukraine conflict was that not more really, rather devastating cyber events have happened based on that yet. It doesn't say that it's not coming, but that is something that, I think a lot of cyber people in the industry have been, surprised about.
It sure looks like a World War II battle. It does not necessarily look like our century battle.
But that doesn't mean that we can relax. Absolutely not. And
nope. Right.
a way that all our kind of lives, our critical infrastructure, our economy is digitally supported. I mean, everything is based on data and computer systems, basically. This trend is just, is getting stronger and stronger. In that sense, we are vulnerable as a society, we are vulnerable as a people, we are vulnerable as individuals and as an economy. And I think this is something that needs to be taken into account. We have to be very aware of that fact, and we have to take action, every one of us, to make sure we know the risks, at least, as good as we can, and we manage those risks as good as we can.
So it sounds like cyber awareness, for lack of a better term, at the individual level, at the institutional level, whether that's governments or businesses or other kinds of institutions.
Cities, communities, any institution, anybody is important. And but it doesn't stop, obviously, with awareness. Awareness is important, but it doesn't stop there.
Got it. So having left Swiss Re a year ago, what are you up to now? What is Maya's next step?
So I'm already in the middle of my next step. So I'm now what I call a portfolio director. So I have a portfolio of engagements, of mandates. Some are companies where I sit on the supervisory board. The others are actually most are cyber engagements. For example, these are voluntary. Like I think in your introduction, you mentioned that I'm also on the board of the Cyber Peace Institute, and I'm also on the board of the Swiss Risk Association. I'm chairing the Cyber Resilience chapter there. And this is where I kind of also engage myself. It's a lot of fun as well. I stay close to the topic that has been so important to me. I'm also participating in the Geneva Dialogue, which is an international dialogue sponsored by Switzerland to also promote and find ways, basically, for cyber peace on a larger level. So it's all kinds of things that keep me busy and on my feet every day.
It sounds like you have a good diversified portfolio, as the bankers would say. How did your years at ETH prepare you for what you did at the Swiss Re and what you're doing now and the work you're doing in cybersecurity?
That is a very good question. So first of all, the ETH gave me a lot of opportunities to kind of just test out things. I don't know how it's nowadays, but when I did my PhD, I did not have to take any courses, right? So the statistics was purely because I thought it was interesting and I needed it. I think the only thing that you needed for that was a lot of curiosity and the will to, just do that in your spare time and on top of everything else. But if you had that, you could do awesome things and, experience awesome things. So that was great. I kept that. I think what I honestly learned in my studies of environmental science is to kind of think in systems and how different things influence others and how that then, kind of leads to, effects that you might or might not have foreseen. So that's definitely important.
What makes ETH special for you?
You see, that is a good question. I don't know actually why that is, but I can tell you it is. Also, in terms of this podcast and other events, if ETH is asking, I'm very happy to give my time and, support both the institution, but also other students and graduates. So, for example, I'm also mentoring excellent, bright young woman from the ETH right now. It's things like that I keep close. But I think as an institution, it really inspires this feeling of we are also a family and we're here. And you can still also look to us and, keep in contact and continue to learn. I love that.
So I'm going to ask some closing questions. What is your favorite place in Zurich or at the ETH? Where is it you'd like to go?
I love the Arboretum in front of Swiss Re and the lake. So that is in spring, have the spring flowers and the swimming is awesome. And it's just, this is where Zurich is.
Maya, thank you so much. That was a great conversation. And thank you for sharing your stories. That was wonderful. I'm Susan Kish, host of the We Are ETH series, telling the story of the alumni and friends of the ETH Zurich, the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich. ETH regularly ranks amongst the top universities in the world with cutting-edge research, science, and people. The people who were there, the people who are there, and the people who will be there. Please subscribe to this podcast and join us wherever you listen, and give us a good rating on Spotify or Apple if you enjoyed today's conversation. I'd like to thank our producers at ETH Circle and LA Media, and thank you, our listeners, for joining us.